Hi, I'm Corey Driver, and this is Moving Forward. So this week we are in Ezekiel 37, Psalm 130, and John 11, and we're talking about resurrection. Now, in my classes, I had a guest speaker not so long ago who really emphasized that we as a people want to be majoring in the majors and minoring in the minors. Good idea. There's enough stuff in the world to fight about without fighting about all the stuff in the world. I'll go so far as to say I think Martin Luther got some stuff wrong. He would assuredly feel that I get a lot of stuff wrong, and that's okay. I am still a Lutheran Christian because I think Dr. Luther's emphasis on God's will and power in saving us is much more important than anything that we are trying to do or not do, aside from simply respond with faithfulness. I think one of the majors that Luther and I and the vast majority of Christians across time and space agree on is that of resurrection. Everything else, I think, stems from the belief that God has power over life and death. Our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has the power to raise humans to a life that is better than heaven. The lectionary passages this week argue that God is the God of resurrection. Now, Ezekiel 37, 1 through 14 is a big life-altering passage for me. Now, I will never forget being in a First United Methodist Church youth group and this passage coming up. We were talking about Ezekiel's vision in the Valley of Dry Bones. Now, I was quite precocious, that is for certain, and I was in 5th or 6th grade and just learning to read Bible for myself. And the youth group leader, I want to say, was very well-meaning and very kind, and I really appreciated having the Bible in front of us. Like, there's any number of things you can do in a church, like games, pizza, whatever, sports, but like we had Bible, and that was really good. But I was reading, and I said, look, I don't think this is a vision. It says that God took Ezekiel to a valley, and then there were bones, and then they were resurrected. I think this is an actual thing. Youth group leader responded, yes, but Ezekiel has a lot of visions, rightly. I countered and said, yeah, but they're called visions when they're visions, like in chapters 1 and 8. The youth group leader replied, yeah, but God doesn't really bring whole armies back to life. That's not what's going on here. You're just not reading it right. I was crushed and humiliated. God doesn't really work like mass resurrection. From that day forward, at least a small part of me wanted to become a biblical scholar so that I wouldn't have to rely on somebody who had authority over me telling me what I had to believe about a passage. And if I didn't agree, I wasn't reading it right. Now, again, let me say that youth group leader was doing me a great service, and I am who I am today, at least in part because of that interaction. And no ill will, right? Like, people from various theological traditions can interpret passages differently. I know that. We actually love that. I still read Ezekiel 37 as an actual happening, as a mass resurrection. And I'm not alone in that. 11th century CE French sage Rashi is quoting the Talmud, Sanhedrin 92b, to say, look, not only did this really happen, but here's the valley and here's the battle that these folks died in, that they're being resurrected from. This was an actual resurrection of actual humans, and looks to 1 Chronicles 7:21 to see the battle. Maybe yes, maybe no. It's actually kind of beside the point. My opinion is the more resurrection, the more better. Why not? The point is that raising to life, resurrection, is never just a metaphor, even if it's also a metaphor. It may be that Ezekiel 37, especially when read in the whole chapter, is talking primarily about national resurrection. Israel will be joined to Judah, and they will both be brought back to life as one united, chosen people. But the surety, the reason for Ezekiel to believe, and Ezekiel's readers to believe that this is going to happen, is because the God who has the power to resurrect humans in a valley after a battle is the same God who can be trusted to resurrect a divided, dead nation. Ezekiel 37, like so many places in the Bible, is a both and situation. This is a vision for the future of resurrection of a united people. And it is a mass resurrection of soldiers who died in a battle. Transitioning, Psalm 130 is a psalm about raising from the depths, often known for its two first words in the Latin translation, De Profundis. The liturgical history of this psalm is that of a psalm of ascents. This is a pilgrim song that the folks streaming to Jerusalem 3-ish times a year would sing as they were arriving. But it's also become a standard for Christian funerals. It's easy to see why. The psalmist cries out from the depths to speak about God's loving kindness and God's deliverance. More than watching for the rising of the sun, the psalmist waits for God to act, to deliver, to forgive, and to remove iniquity. The image of a soul, or innermost being, waiting on God to raise it up from the depths is a classic image of resurrection. At the same time, the psalm also speaks to the longing of mourners and those on a long pilgrimage. The gospel account, according to John, speaks of Jesus' resurrection of Lazarus. And every time I read this, it feels like Lazarus, whom Jesus obviously loved and counted as a close friend, is a friend, but also is an object lesson. Jesus stays away long enough so that he is certain that Lazarus will die. Then Jesus prays prayers out loud that he knew he didn't need to say. Look at verse 42. He didn't need to even say this to God, but he says this for the people to hear it. He wants the people to know he is the resurrection. When Lazarus returned to life physically, many people who did not prior believed in Jesus. This whole episode with Lazarus is an object lesson, and it is friend love, but it is an object lesson to say, look, Jesus is the resurrection and has power over death to bring life. What's the point? Resurrection is central to the story we tell. Elijah, Elisha, Peter, Paul, all these people are bringing folk back to life. Why? God's mission, especially in the person of Jesus, is to save humans from sin and death. The renewing of hearts and minds and following the words and deeds of Jesus and Jesus' salvific work saves us from sin. The resurrection saves us from death. In the person of Jesus, God does both, because God is a God of resurrection. Thanks be to God.